Behind Hollywood's glitter lies a graveyard of broken dreams. These stars had fame, beauty, and millions watching them until their lives ended in shocking crashes, brutal murders, and chilling mysteries. Tonight we uncover the dark side of stardom where the spotlight fades and nightmare begins. Number 1. Jayne Mansfield. Hollywood loved Jayne Mansfield for all the obvious reasons. She was dazzling, fearless, and impossible to ignore, a platinum blonde bombshell with a smile built for flashbulbs and a presence that could turn every head in the room. To the public, she looked like pure glamour. But behind the curves, the headlines, and the camera-ready confidence was a woman fighting to prove she was more than a beautiful image. As her fame exploded, Jayne became one of the few women bold enough to challenge the era's biggest icons. She lit up the screen in films like The Girl Can't Help It, embraced scandal without apology, and built a career on charm, wit, and sheer nerve. She knew Hollywood could worship you one day and replace you the next, so she kept smiling, kept performing, and kept giving the world exactly what it wanted, even when the pressure was crushing. Then, in 1967, everything ended in an instant. While traveling to New Orleans, Jayne's car slammed into a tractor-trailer in a horrific crash that killed her and 2 others. The accident was so violent, it immediately sparked gruesome rumors and national shock. One moment she was a living symbol of fame and seduction. The next, she became another tragic headline in Hollywood's long, dark history. Jayne Mansfield gave the world glamour, excitement, and a larger-than-life fantasy. But behind the spotlight was a woman who wanted to be seen, respected, and remembered for more than her beauty. That may be the saddest part of her story, not just how tragically it ended, but how much of her was never fully understood while she was still alive. Number 2. Will Rogers. Before tragedy froze his name in history, Will Rogers was the voice America trusted. He was witty without being cruel, wise without sounding proud, and charming enough to make an entire nation feel like he was speaking straight to them. A cowboy vaudeville star, film actor, and newspaper columnist, Rogers had a rare gift. He could make people laugh while telling them the truth they did not want to hear. By the summer of 1935, Rogers was still chasing stories with the same restless curiosity that made him famous. He joined legendary aviator Wiley Post on a flight through Alaska, a journey tied to Post's exploration of a possible Alaska-Siberia air route. It sounded like the kind of adventure only 2 American icons could survive: one, a master of the skies; the other, a master of the human spirit. But history can turn brutal in a single heartbeat. On August 15, 1935, near Point Barrow, their aircraft crashed after takeoff, killing both men instantly. The shock hit like a national wound. One moment, Will Rogers was still the warm, familiar face of America's humor and hope. The next, he was gone in the frozen silence of Alaska, leaving behind a country that suddenly felt smaller, sadder, and far less certain of tomorrow. The tragedy of Will Rogers was not just the crash. It was the sudden loss of a man who made an entire nation feel a little more human. He did not belong only to Hollywood or the stage, he belonged to everyday people. And when he was gone, America did not just mourn a legend. It mourned someone who felt like family. Number 3. Phil Hartman. Phil Hartman was the kind of performer who made comedy look effortless. On Saturday Night Live, he could disappear into presidents' egomaniacs or polished fools with chilling precision. On news radio, he turned Bill McNeil into one of television's funniest narcissists. And on The Simpsons, his voices of Troy McClure and Lionel Hutz became the kind of characters audiences never forget. He was not just funny, he was reliable, razor-sharp, and quietly essential to everything he touched. Long before that, Hartman had already built a strange and brilliant career path. He worked with the Groundlings, helped create the world around Pee Wee Herman, co-wrote Pee Wee's Big Adventure, and later appeared in films like House Guest Sergeant Bilko and Jingle All the Way. He had range timing, and that rare gift Hollywood always claims to love, the ability to make everyone around him better. Off-camera, though, the life that seemed stable and successful was hiding cracks no audience could see. Then came the night that turned admiration into heartbreak. In the early hours of May 28, 1998, at the couple's home in Encino, Hartman was shot to death by his wife, Bryn Hartman, after what reports described as a heated argument. She later confessed to a friend, returned to the house, and died by suicide as police closed in. The news was so horrifying because it felt impossible one of the most beloved faces in American comedy had not died in scandal or decline, but in an act of violence inside his own home. That is why Phil Hartman's story still hits so hard. He gave people laughter without forcing it, brilliance without vanity, and characters that slipped so naturally into pop culture they still feel alive. When he died, fans did not just lose the man from SNL News Radio or The Simpsons. They lost one of those rare artists who made the world feel lighter right up until the moment it suddenly went dark. Number 4. Susan Cabot. Susan Cabot had the kind of Hollywood rise that looked glamorous from a distance and far more fragile up close. She built her name in tough, stylish films like Tomahawk, The Duel at Silver Creek, and Ride Clear of Diablo, earning a reputation as a striking presence in the westerns and B-movies that once filled American theaters. Later, she became even more recognizable to cult film fans through Roger Corman's The Wasp Woman. She had beauty screen presence and that sharp, dangerous energy the camera loved. But like so many stars of her era, the spotlight did not protect her from the loneliness waiting outside it. As the years passed, Cabot's life grew quieter and darker. Her acting career faded, and the woman once seen on movie posters slipped further away from the world that had once celebrated her. By the 1980s, reports described her as struggling with severe mental illness, depression, and overwhelming fear. The image of the glamorous actress had long since cracked, leaving behind someone isolated, troubled, and carrying battles the public could not see. It is that hidden collapse that makes her story feel so haunting, because the tragedy did not begin the night she died. In many ways, it had been building for years. Then came the horrifying end. On December 10, 1986, in her Encino home, Susan Cabot was beaten to death with a weightlifting bar by her 22-year-old son, Timothy Roman. The crime stunned Hollywood not only because of its brutality, but because it happened inside the one place that should have been safest, her own home. Roman was later convicted of involuntary manslaughter, and the case drew national attention because it mixed fame, family tragedy, mental illness, and violence into one devastating final chapter. What makes Susan Cabot's story so heartbreaking is that it feels less like the fall of a celebrity and more like the slow disappearance of a human being. The woman audiences remembered from Tomahawk or The Wasp Woman seemed powerful on screen, but real life gave her no heroic ending. Behind the old film credits was a mother, a troubled soul, and a woman whose life ended in fear and unimaginable pain. And that is what lingers most, not just the horror of how she died, but the sadness of how far she had drifted from the bright world that once knew her name. Number 5. Matthew Perry. Matthew Perry became unforgettable the moment Chandler Bing walked into Friends with that dry wit, wounded charm, and perfect timing that made millions of people feel like they knew him. He was funny in a way that felt effortless but never shallow. He had the rare kind of screen presence that made humor feel personal, like he was letting viewers in on the joke and the pain behind it. But what made Matthew Perry's story hit so deeply was that the man making the world laugh was quietly fighting battles most people could not see. For years, he spoke openly about addiction relapse and the exhausting fight to stay alive while living under the pressure of massive fame. That honesty made people love him even more. He was not just a sitcom star anymore. He became someone many saw as brave, vulnerable, and painfully human, a man trying to survive the very life that had made him famous. Then came the ending no one wanted to believe. On October 28, 2023, Perry was found unresponsive in the pool at his Los Angeles home. He was 54. In December, the Los Angeles County Medical Examiner ruled his death an accident caused by the acute effects of ketamine with drowning coronary artery disease and the effects of buprenorphine listed as contributing factors. The news devastated fans because it felt so cruelly familiar. Another beloved Hollywood figure gone too soon after spending so long trying to outrun his own pain. In the end, Matthew Perry's story hurts because he gave people laughter while carrying so much suffering behind the scenes. The world will always remember the sharp one-liners, the awkward grin, and the comfort he brought through friends. But behind that legend was a man who kept fighting even when the weight of it all seemed unbearable. It felt like losing someone who had helped them through their own darkest days. If you want him back to life, comment 1. Number 6. Judy Garland. Some stars become famous. Judy Garland became unforgettable. With The Wizard of Oz, she gave Hollywood one of its most enduring images, a young girl chasing hope at the end of a yellow brick road. Then came Meet Me in St. Louis and A Star is Born, where she proved she was never just a child star with a beautiful voice. She had something deeper, a way of making every song sound lived in, every smile slightly fragile, and every performance feel like it came from somewhere painfully real. Fame, however, came with a price long before the audience could see it. Behind the applause was a woman pushed through the unforgiving studio system at a very young age, expected to stay dazzling no matter what it cost her. The pressure built over the years, exhaustion, insecurity, dependency, and the endless demand to keep performing, as if nothing inside her was breaking. By the time Judy Garland became a legend, she was already carrying the kind of pain that no spotlight could hide forever. In June 1969, the story reached its tragic end. Garland was found dead in London on June 22nd, at the age of 47. The coroner determined that she died from an accidental barbiturate overdose, an unintentional self-overdosage, not suicide. For the public, the loss felt devastating, but not entirely surprising, which somehow made it even sadder. She had spent so much of her life giving the world beauty, comfort, and emotion, while privately fighting to hold herself together. What still lingers about Judy Garland is not just the tragedy of how her life ended, but how much of herself she poured out before it did. The voice, the vulnerability, the heartbreak in her performances, all of it came from somewhere real. Audiences will always remember Dorothy, the music, and the magic. But behind that legend was a woman who kept giving even when life had already taken far too much. Number 7. James Dean. At just 24, James Dean had already become the face of a restless generation. In East of Eden, he brought a raw emotional intensity that felt almost dangerous to watch. Then, Rebel Without a Cause turned him into something bigger than a movie star. It made him a symbol of rebellion, loneliness, and youth that could not find its place in the world. Even Giant, released after his death, only deepened the sense that Hollywood had discovered someone rare just as time was running out. Fame came fast, But James Dean did not seem built for the polished version of celebrity. He carried a quiet intensity, a vulnerability, and a reckless edge that made audiences believe every look, every silence, every flash of pain on his face. That was his power. He did not perform emotion, he seemed to live inside it. And maybe that is why people connected with him so deeply. I felt less like a star, and more like someone exposing something real. On September 30th, 1955, the story ended with terrifying speed. Dean was driving his Porsche 550 Spider toward a race in Salinas when another car turned into his path near the junction of Highway 46 and 41 by Cholam, California. The crash was catastrophic. His passenger mechanic, Rolf Vutherick, survived with serious injuries, but Dean was pronounced dead on arrival at Paso Robles War Memorial Hospital. He was only 24, and two of his most famous films had not even reached audiences yet. James Dean's story, Alive, is not only the violence of how it ended, but the feeling that the world never got to see how far he could have gone. He left behind only a handful of films, yet somehow built a legend actors spend entire lifetimes chasing. And that is what makes his death so painful. James Dean did not just die young. He became the permanent image of talent-interrupted youth frozen in time, and a future that vanished before it could fully begin. Number 8. Judith Barsi. By the time most children are still learning how to dream, Judith Barsi was already living inside one. With her bright voice and unmistakable innocence, she began appearing in commercials and television, then reached wider audiences through Jaws: The Revenge. Not long after, she gave life to Ducky in The Land Before Time and Anne-Marie in All Dogs Go to Heaven, two roles that would make her unforgettable, even though both films were released after she died. Judith's success was rising, but inside her own home, something far darker was taking shape. Reports later revealed that her father had grown increasingly abusive, unstable, and threatening as her career advanced. There had already been warning signs, including police involvement, yet none of it was enough to pull her out of danger. The most haunting part is that while adults around her were noticing the fear Judith still had to keep smiling, keep working, and keep being the sweet little girl, audiences thought they knew. July 1988 was the moment that hidden terror became irreversible. Inside their home, Judith and her mother Maria were killed by her father, József Barsi, before he took his own life. She was only 10 years old. Even now, the case feels almost unbearable to revisit, not only because of the brutality, but because the danger had been visible for so long. It was the kind of tragedy that leaves behind one painful question: how could a child be so clearly at risk and still not be saved? Years later, people would continue hearing Judith without realizing they were listening to a voice already lost. In The Land Before Time, Ducky sounded full of innocence, warmth, and life. In All Dogs Go to Heaven, that same little voice carried a sweetness that still reaches audiences today. That is what makes her story so hard to shake. Judith Barsi was never meant to become a symbol of tragedy. She was a child with talent, vulnerability, and a whole future ahead of her. And that future was taken before it ever had the chance to begin. Number 9. Ray Liotta. For a certain generation, Ray Liotta did not just play dangerous men, he made danger feel magnetic. In Goodfellas, he turned Henry Hill into one of the most unforgettable characters in crime film history, all charm on the surface and chaos underneath. But that was only part of his power. He had the rare kind of face that could look warm, threatening, wounded, or ruthless in the span of a single scene. Nothing about Liotta ever felt overly polished, and that was exactly why audiences believed him. He brought a rawness to the screen that made even his quiet moments feel unpredictable. Whether he was playing a mobster, a cop, or a man cracking under pressure, There was always something alive behind his eyes, something restless, sharp, and impossible to fake. That edge stayed with him for decades, helping him build a career that stretched far beyond one iconic role. Then came the kind of news that feels unreal when it first breaks. On May 26, 2000, 22 Ray Liotta died in his sleep at age 67 while in Santo Domingo, Dominican Republic, where he was filming Dangerous Waters. The suddenness of it made the loss hit even harder. There was no long public farewell, no final curtain call, just the abrupt disappearance of a man whose screen presence had felt so fierce and alive for so many years. Maybe that is why Ray Liotta's death lingered the way it did. The laugh, the stare, the volatility, the emotion he made characters feel like they could reach right through the screen. And when he was gone, fans did not just lose the star of Goodfellas' Field of Dreams and Something Wild. They lost a presence that always made the story feel more dangerous, more human, and more real. Number 10. Brittany Murphy. By the late 1990s, Brittany Murphy had become one of those actresses audiences instantly connected with. In Clueless, she turned Ty into something far more memorable than comic relief, awkward, vulnerable, funny, and completely human. Then came darker, more emotionally charged work in Girl Interrupted and 8 Mile, where she showed she could move far beyond the bubbly image people first fell in love with. She had that rare quality. Hollywood is always chasing. She felt real even when the world around her did not. What made Brittany so magnetic was that she never seemed distant or untouchable. There was warmth in her performances, but also fragility, as if every character carried a piece of her own heart. Whether she was making people laugh or breaking them quietly, she brought a kind of emotional openness that made viewers feel close to her. That is part of why her rise felt so exciting. She did not seem manufactured by Hollywood. She seemed like someone audiences wanted to protect. December 20th, 2009 shattered that image overnight. Murphy was found unresponsive in her Los Angeles home and later died at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center at just 32 years old. The Los Angeles County coroner ruled her death accidental, caused by pneumonia, with contributing factors of severe iron deficiency anemia and multiple drug intoxication from prescription and over-the-counter medications. The shock was immediate, and the sadness only deepened when her husband, Simon Monjack, died in the same home 5 months later, amid similarly disturbing circumstances. Years later, Brittany Murphy's story still feels deeply unsettling because it never reads like a normal Hollywood ending. The woman who lit up Clueless and gave 8 Mile its tender edge was gone before her talent had fully reached its peak. What remains is not just the mystery people still talk about, but the ache of losing someone who seemed to have so much more left to give. Brittany did not just leave behind famous roles. She left behind the feeling of a bright light cut off far too early. Number 11. Rebecca Schaeffer. Rebecca Schaeffer looked like the kind of young actress Hollywood was only beginning to figure out. She first found attention as a teen model, then stepped into television with One Life to Live before reaching a wider audience on the sitcom My Sister Sam. There was a brightness to her on screen that felt easy and natural, the kind that made people assume a much bigger future was already on its way. She was only 21, but everything about her career suggested she was still at the very beginning. The fame had already drawn the wrong kind of attention. For years, Robert John Bardo, an obsessed fan, had been stalking her writing letters and repeatedly trying to get close to her. What makes Rebecca's story so chilling is how ordinary that danger must have seemed at first, just another unwanted shadow following a public figure. But in her case, that obsession did not fade. It escalated quietly and relentlessly until it reached her front door. On July 18, 1989, Bardo went to Schaefer's Los Angeles apartment and shot her to death. The murder shocked Hollywood not only because of its brutality, but because it exposed how easily a stranger could cross the line from fantasy into violence. Rebecca was rushed to Cedars-Sinai Medical Center, but she could not be saved. She had been preparing for the next stage of her career when her life was cut short in the most horrifying way imaginable. The Her case helped push anti-stalking laws forward in California and beyond, turning Rebecca Schaefer into a tragic symbol of a danger the public had not fully understood before. But behind that legal legacy was still a young woman with real dreams, real momentum, and a life that should have kept unfolding. That is why her story still hurts, because when people remember Rebecca, they do not just remember a crime. They remember a future that was stolen in broad daylight. Number 12. Bob Saget. For millions of viewers, Bob Saget felt like the safest man on television. As Danny Tanner on Full House, he became the face of warmth, order, and fatherly comfort in one of America's most beloved family sitcoms. Then, as the host of America's Funniest Home Videos, he brought a completely different energy, quick, playful, and effortlessly familiar. That double image made him unforgettable, the clean-cut TV dad on one side, the sharp stand-up comic on the other. What made Saget so memorable was that he never felt fake. Even when he was playing the wholesome father figure, there was always something human underneath it. Something warm, awkward, funny, and real. Audiences trusted him. Colleagues loved him. And by the time he was touring again later in life, he had become more than a sitcom star. He was one of those rare entertainers people felt they had grown up with. That is why the news in January 2022 landed with such force. Saget was found dead on January 9th in his hotel room at the Ritz-Carlton Orlando area while on a stand-up tour just hours after performing in Florida. He was 65. Investigators found no signs of foul play, and the medical examiner later concluded that he died from an accidental blow to the head, likely from a backward fall, after which he went to sleep and never woke up. Maybe that is what made Bob Saget's death feel so unusually sad. There was no long public decline, no final goodbye, no sense that the world was preparing to lose him. One day, he was still doing what he loved, still making people laugh, still moving forward. The next, he was gone. And for so many fans, it did not feel like losing just another celebrity. It felt like losing a familiar presence who had quietly been part of their lives for decades. Number 13. Vic Morrow. War dramas had many tough faces, but Vic Morrow carried something harder to fake credibility. He first broke through in Blackboard Jungle, then became a television icon as Sergeant Chip Saunders in Combat, a role that made him one of the most recognizable faces of 1960s TV. Later films like The Bad News Bears kept that same edge alive, gritty, intense, and deeply believable. He was never the polished kind of Hollywood star. He was the kind audiences trusted the second he appeared on screen. That rough-edged authenticity became his signature. Morrow did not play men who merely looked battle-tested. He made them feel worn down by life, pride, and pain. There was always something real in his performances, something restless beneath the surface, and that gave him a presence that stayed with people long after the scene ended. By the early 1980s, he was still working steadily, still bringing that same force to the screen, and still chasing roles that demanded more than charm. Everything changed before dawn on July 23, 1982. Morrow was filming a Vietnam sequence for Twilight Zone the movie at Indian Dunes near Santa Clarita, California, alongside child actors Micah Din Lei and Renee Shin-Yi Chen. During the scene, pyrotechnic effects damaged a low-flying helicopter, which crashed onto them and killed all three. The horror of it stunned Hollywood instantly, not just because a well-known actor had died, but because it happened on a movie set, in the middle of making entertainment where no one should have lost their life. Even now, Vic Morrow's story feels heavier than a typical Hollywood tragedy. His death did not just end a career. It exposed how dangerous filmmaking could become when ambition outran safety. The accident led to years of legal fallout and helped push the industry toward stricter safety standards. But behind all of that was still a man with a fierce screen presence, a long career, and more work left in him. And maybe that is why his ending remains so haunting, because the final image is not of applause or farewell, but of a performer doing his job right up until the moment everything went terribly wrong.
I stood up to say goodbye like all the rest.
Country music has brought joy to millions of people for many years. Some of its biggest stars gave us songs we will never forget. Behind the rhinestone suits and stadium roars were quiet wars against ruthless diseases. They fought brave battles with diseases that slowly took their lives. Tonight we honor 15 voices silenced too soon, stories, heartbreaking legacies, unforgettable. Try not to gasp at them today. Number 1, Joey Feek, the final duet no one was ready for. Joey Feek didn't sing country music, she embodied it. Born and raised on a humble Indiana farm, Joey carried a warmth that felt baked into her voice like summer dusk and homemade pie. When she moved to Nashville in 2002, she arrived without theatrics, armed only with raw talent and quiet determination. Her dream wasn't loud, but it was unstoppable. Then came Rory, her duet partner, later her husband, forever her harmony. Together, Joey and Rory created music that felt less like stardom and more like front porch storytelling. Their songs about love, faith, and family didn't just reach listeners, they adopted them. Fans didn't feel like they watched the couple. They felt like they knew them. The plot twist struck in 2014 right after their daughter Indiana was born, cervical cancer. Joey fought the disease with the same grace she used to chase her career privately, bravely, beautifully. Surgeries, chemo, hopeful pauses, until the pauses turned heavy. When medicine ran out of answers, Joey chose home, not defeat choice. Her final months were lived, not staged. Bedside lullabies, prayers, ordinary miracles, the purest encore. She passed in March 2016 at 40. Too young to leave, too genuine to forget. Her legacy isn't polished, it's permanent. A reminder that even the brightest voices are human, first stars, second legends, forever. Number 2, Don Williams, the gentle giant who whispered his way into history. Don Williams was built like a monument and sounded like a confession. At 6'1", with a baritone as calm as slow-moving rivers, he earned the nickname the Gentle Giant, and somehow it fit perfectly. In an industry powered by sequins and shouting guitars, Don succeeded by doing the opposite. Less sparkle, more soul, fewer words, deeper truth. Born in Floydada, Texas, Don grew up absorbing small-town rhythms before Nashville even knew his name. When he broke through in the 1970s, his voice felt like a hand on the shoulder during life's quietest breakdowns. Hits like Amanda, It Must Be Love, and Lord. I Hope This Day Is Good didn't demand attention, they disarmed it. He sang softly, yet stadiums leaned in. Behind the scenes, Don was fighting a battle he never advertised. Emphysema, a chronic lung disease, slowly tightened the world around his breath. Touring once his lifeline to fans became impossible. The man who gave the world calm was now searching for his own. In September 2017, Don passed away peacefully at 78, leaving no chaos, no public goodbyes, just a silence that said enough. Don Williams didn't just influence country music, he retuned its heartbeat. Proof that legends don't always roar. Sometimes they comfort the loudest by whispering the longest. Number 3, Toby Keith, the oilfield cowboy who carried America on his shoulders. Toby Keith was the voice of unapologetic grit. Long before arenas screamed his lyrics, Toby worked the Oklahoma oil fields, punching clocks, hauling steel, and playing football under Friday night lights. Country wasn't his backup plan, it was his after-shift escape hatch. When Nashville finally heard him, the world got an artist who sounded like red dirt, motor oil, heartbreak, and fireworks. Hits like Should Have Been a Cowboy, How Do You Like Me Now, and the chest-thumping anthem. Courtesy of the red, white, and blue turned him into a symbol of roots, resilience, and a kind of patriotism that didn't feel scripted. He supported U.S. troops, played countless benefit shows, and gave back to communities that reminded him of home. Then came the plot twist no fan was briefed for. In late 2021, Toby was diagnosed with stomach cancer. He kept it private at first, no press tours, no pity interviews, just treatment rooms and quiet courage. Surgery, chemotherapy, good days followed by brutal setbacks. The fighter in him never clocked out. When his strength returned, even briefly, he walked back on stage, tipping his hat to the crowd like a man who refused to be counted out of his own story. On February 5, 2024, Toby passed away at 62. The cowboy we thought was bulletproof wasn't gone because he was weak. He was gone because life had finally collected a debt he'd been paying in silence. His music still roars at rodeos, bars, and tailgates, louder now, because he's not here to sing it himself. Toby proved that legends don't live forever because they win every battle. They live forever because they show up for them anyway. Number 4, Charley Pride, the man who changed the genre, then changed the world. Charley Pride walked into country music like a history edit no one expected. Born in 1934 in Sledge, Mississippi, he grew up picking cotton, throwing baseballs, and dreaming bigger than the Jim Crow South would ever comfortably allow. Before music claimed him, baseball did. He played in the Negro American Leagues, a powerhouse hitter with pro-level talent. But life had other stage directions. When he finally turned to music, Nashville didn't just get a singer, they got a revolution in boots. In the late 1960s, Charley shattered a color barrier that the genre hadn't even admitted existed. His voice was warm, smooth, effortlessly sincere, and unmistakably unforgettable. Hits like Kiss an Angel, Good Mornin' Is Anybody Goin' to San Antone, and Mountain of Love didn't just top charts. They reshaped the cultural compass of country music. He became the first black country superstar, winning the CMA's Entertainer of the Year in 1971, and proving that the genre could stretch wider without losing its soul. Fame never turned him flashy. He carried himself like the gentleman who still believed kindness was a superpower. Even into his 80s, his voice remained strong, steady, and emotionally devastating in the gentlest way possible. Then came the final plot twist. After a triumphant performance at the CMAs in November 2020, Charley contracted COVID-19. Within weeks, complications overtook him. On December 12, 2020, he passed away at 86, leaving behind a silence that felt louder than any anthem. Charlie Pride's legacy isn't about making it in country music. It's about remaking it, then leaving the world better tuned than when he found it. Number 5. Glen Campbell, the golden memory that refused to disappear. Glen Campbell was the definition of effortless talent, except nothing about his climb was effortless. Before he was a household name, he was the guy holding the guitar for other legends. As part of the elite studio collective, the Wrecking Crew, Glen played on recordings for Elvis Presley, Frank Sinatra, and countless stars who thought they were the main characters. The plot twist, the sidekick, was a virtuoso. When Glen stepped into the spotlight himself, he brought a genre-bending sound that blended country warmth with pop precision, making songs feel both intimate and arena-ready. Hits like Wichita Lineman, By the Time I Get to Phoenix, and Rhinestone Cowboy didn't just chart, they narrated America's emotional landscape. His voice was smooth, honest, and instantly recognizable, but it was his musicianship that made the industry gasp first. Glen also became a TV staple as the host of the Glen Campbell Good Time Hour in the 1970s, proving that charm, not chaos, could carry primetime. Then came the cruelest irony: Hollywood or Nashville could script Alzheimer's disease. In 2011, Glen revealed his diagnosis not with shame but with strategy. His answer wasn't retreat, it was a farewell tour, a victory lap with vanishing memories. Audiences cried at shows where Glen sometimes forgot lyrics because they knew the man hadn't forgotten them. He was saying goodbye in real time before the disease could take the mic entirely. On August 8, 2010, Glen passed away at 81. His legacy stands as proof that memory isn't stored in the brain alone. Sometimes it's stored in the soundtrack of a nation and the people who refuse to forget the voice behind it. Number 6. Tammy Wynette, heartbreak's favorite storyteller who sang through the storm. Tammy Wynette didn't just perform heartbreak, she narrated it like she had personally co-written life's cruelest episodes. Born in 1942 in Tremont, Mississippi, Tammy's early years were stitched together with grit, grief, and gospel echoes drifting through open windows. Before she became a legend, she worked as a beautician, balancing single motherhood and late-night dreams of Nashville. When success finally called, she answered with a voice that sounded like shattered glass wrapped in velvet. Kiss an Angel Good Mornin' might have made stadiums sway, but Stand By Your Man made history. Critics called it old-fashioned, fans called it therapy. The secret ingredient: Tammy didn't sugarcoat pain, she harmonized it. And her audience felt every syllable like a personal letter from someone who understood love's worst plot twists. Offstage, Tammy was living a life that hit harder than her lyrics ever hinted. For much of her adult life, she battled serious medical complications involving her stomach, liver, and intestines. She endured countless surgeries and long stretches of chronic pain, often recording albums while her body begged for intermission. Tammy's voice stayed defiant even when her health staged a quiet rebellion. Tammy passed away on April 6, 1998, at 55 from heart failure, worsened by years of illness and physical exhaustion. The world mourned not just the singer, but the woman who proved that vulnerability wasn't a weakness, it was a legacy. Her songs live on in jukeboxes, documentaries, and late-night reflections, forever reminding us that the most powerful storytellers are the ones who survive the storms they sing about. Number 7. Hank Snow, the railroad poet who outran poverty but not time. Hank Snow's voice always sounded like motion, maybe because he never stopped moving. Born in 1914 in rural Nova Scotia, Canada, Hank grew up in hardship sharp enough to derail most dreams. His childhood wasn't scored by guitars, but by fishing boats, factory whistles, and survival shifts. Music was his ticket out, and he clung to it like a lifeline made of melody. When he reached Nashville, he didn't just arrive, he launched. Joining the Grand Ole Opry in 1950, Hank became one of its longest-standing pillars, turning stories of trains, travel, and heartbreak into chart-topping gospel for wanderers. "I've Been Everywhere" wasn't a song, it was his autobiography with a chorus. "I'm Moving On" became a mantra for resilience, embraced by fans, truckers, soldiers, and anyone who ever needed a clean break from a bad chapter. Even Hank's influence stretched beyond music. The phrase "pull a Hank Snow" became slang for tactical retreats and advances the kind of cultural footprint that proves a legend is bigger than his records. But while Hank outran poverty, he couldn't outrun the clock. In his later years, breathing troubles and heart complications quietly boxed in the man whose career was built on open roads. After a long decline in health, Hank passed away from heart failure in December 1999 at 85. His farewell wasn't loud or tragic in spectacle, but heavy in silence, the kind that plays after the final note of a song you know you'll never hear live again. Hank proved something rare. Legends don't need glamour to last. They need truth, rhythm, mileage, and a story worth riding along for. His music is still traveling. We're just the ones standing still now, waving as it passes. Number 8, Ray Price, the voice that outlived trends, but not fate. Ray Price never followed the current, he conducted it. Born in 1926 in tiny Wood County, Texas, Ray grew up absorbing the heartbeat of honky-tonk bars, gospel pews, and late-night steel guitar laments. When he hit Nashville, he didn't just record songs, he rewired the genre. He pushed country beyond its own borders, first championing the raw, rowdy, honky-tonk sound, then evolving into lush, string-backed arrangements that made country feel like a slow dance between grit and grace. Hits like Crazy Arms, Heartaches, By the Number, and For the Good Times became generational heirloom songs played at weddings, funerals, and every bittersweet milestone in between. His baritone was rich, steady, and instantly recognizable, a sonic comfort zone that never needed vocal acrobatics to land the emotional punch. Then came the diagnosis that shook his inner circle long before the world caught on pancreatic cancer in 2012. Ray faced it the same way he delivered a song, directly, honestly, without theatrics. He pursued treatment, performed when his strength allowed, and kept his dignity center stage, even when his body signaled a final curtain. But by 2013, the cancer returned more aggressively, spreading fast, rewriting the ending with ruthless efficiency. When the fight became unwinnable, Ray chose home over hospitals, family over interventions, and peace over public statements. Ray passed away on December 16, 2013, at 87. No dramatic downfall, no industry feuds, just the quiet exit of a man who had already said everything that mattered in the songs he left behind. His legacy stands as proof that true influence isn't about staying relevant. It's about becoming eternal. Number 9, Eddie Arnold, the soft voice that carried a giant legacy. Eddie Arnold looked like the boy next door and sounded like America's calmest inner monologue. Born in 1918 in Henderson, Tennessee, Eddie grew up in rural simplicity, earning early fame not through flash but authenticity. When the 1940s and 50s turned country into honky-tonk heartbreak broadcasts, Eddie took a different road, smooth, warm, and built for the living room. They called him the Tennessee Plowboy, a nickname rooted in his farm upbringing, but his impact reached far beyond fields. His voice was the original genre disruptor, softer phrasing, cleaner delivery, bigger emotional range. Songs like "Make the World Go Away Anytime" and "I'll Hold You in My Heart" Till I Can Hold You in My Arms became staples for generations who wanted their heartbreak with a side of hope. Eddie didn't chase crossover success, he defined it. His music traveled globally, charming the UK and pop charts alike without ever changing its temperament. But time writes endings even for the gentlest legends. In his later years, Eddie battled severe arthritis, an illness that slowly turned movement into a negotiation and touring into a memory. The pain didn't harden him, it humbled the world watching from afar. Doctors noted age-related complications stacking quietly, breathing struggles, weakening immunity, and a body finally asking for rest after decades of giving comfort to others. Eddie passed away on May 8, 2008, just 2 months shy of his 90th birthday. Surrounded by family, peaceful to the end, Eddie proved that legends don't need volume to endure. Sometimes influence lasts longest when it soothes loudest without shouting at all. Number 10. George Jones, the greatest voice forged in fire and fragile peace. George Jones didn't just sing country, he wounded and healed it at the same time. Born in 1931 in Saratoga, Texas, George grew up in a home where music was salvation and survival was routine. By the 1950s, his voice had become the gold standard, nasal aching, impossibly emotional, and instantly iconic. But while his songs sounded like open-heart surgery, his real life sounded like a bar fight the heart kept losing. For years, George battled alcohol and substance addiction, earning a reputation as unpredictable off-stage. Missed shows, questionable decisions, and a life lived too fast until he slammed the brakes, got clean, and rebuilt himself quietly with the same stubborn loyalty fans heard in his lyrics. And speaking of lyrics, He Stopped Loving Her Today wasn't just a hit, it was a coronation. Many still call it the greatest country song ever recorded. Not because it was perfect, but because it was true, and George delivered truth better than oxygen. Ironically, oxygen became the one thing he struggled to hold on to. Decades of smoking and past self-inflicted chaos took a toll on his lungs. Respiratory illness wasn't the headline of his career, but it became the final chapter of his body. Hospital stays canceled, concerts fevered hopes, and one final emergency room visit in April 2013 sealed a silence no encore could interrupt. George passed away on April 26, 2013, at 81 from respiratory failure. The world mourned not a fall, but a fade, the slow dimming of the brightest, most honest voice country ever borrowed from the human condition. George proved something rare: legends don't last because they're invincible. They last because they make vulnerability sound like victory. Number 11. Roger Miller, the king of clever lyrics, who laughed in the face of life until life laughed last. Roger Miller was country music's class clown, with a genius IQ for wordplay. Born in 1936 in Fort Worth, Texas, Roger grew up in a world that felt like a punchline waiting to happen. Poverty wasn't a metaphor for him, it was breakfast. He picked cotton in Oklahoma, worked odd jobs, and turned everyday absurdity into melodies that sounded like inside jokes the whole world somehow understood. When Roger hit Nashville, he rewrote the rules by refusing to take them seriously. Songs like King of the Road, Dang Me, and Chug-a-Lug were catchy because they were mischievous, clever, and honest in the sneakiest way possible. He didn't need vocal gymnastics, he had lyrical backflips instead. In 1965 alone, Roger won 7 Grammy Awards in one night, still a record few artists in any genre ever touch. By the end of his career, he had collected 11 Grammys total, proving country could be witty without losing its heart. His music sounded light, but his talent was heavyweight. His voice had a relaxed southern drawl, his humor was dry, sharp, and brilliant, and his delivery made listeners grin before the emotional gut punch landed. Fans sang his songs like shared secrets, not staged performances. Then came the irony. The man who built his career on voice and timing lost the very thing that made him immortal. Years of smoking damaged his lungs and throat, leading to a lung cancer diagnosis that later spread to his vocal cords. Treatment bought him time, but not a miracle. The world that once leaned in to laugh now leaned in to grieve. Roger passed away on October 25, 1992, at 56 from lung and throat cancer. His exit wasn't theatrical, but it was poetic. The man who made America smile longest left a silence that made America cry loudest. Roger proved this. Sometimes the funniest legends hurt the deepest and leave the longest echo. Number 12. Charlie Louvin, the harmony that survived the spotlight, but not the silence of illness. Charlie Louvin was one half of the Louvin brothers, the duo that taught country music how to feel. Born in 1927 in Alabama, Charlie grew up singing harmony long before it became his signature. When he and his brother Ira hit the 1950s scene, their sound was pure, tight, spiritual, and heartbreaking in the most elegant way. Songs like When I Stopped Dreaming and Cash on the Barrelhead weren't just influential, they became the blueprint for emotional storytelling in country and gospel alike. No frills, no distractions, just human truth layered in vocal symmetry. After the brothers split, Charlie carried on solo, quieter in persona, but towering in respect. He joined the Grand Ole Opry, toured steadily, and became a mentor figure to younger artists who begged him to record with them, not for commercial gain, but credibility only a legend could lend. Charlie never chased noise. He let the world come to him one harmony at a time. Then came the cruel irony. In 2010, Charlie was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. He fought through surgery and treatment, even returning to the stage when his strength allowed, because performing was his language for staying alive. But by 2011, the cancer returned sharper, faster, and impossible to harmonize with hope any longer. The man who once made millions cry with beauty was now making them cry with reality. Charlie passed away on January 26, 2011, at 83, surrounded by family. No public memorial, no loud farewell tour, just the kind of ending that matched the man. Humble, dignified, devastating, unforgettable. Charlie Pride broke barriers. Miller broke rules, but Charlie Louvin, he broke hearts gently, then left them healed permanently by legacy. Number 13. Dan Seals, the pop voice who found a country soul and left us too soon. Dan Seals had a career arc that felt like a reinvention, a remix, and a revelation all at once. Born in 1948 in McCamey, Texas, Dan first reached fame in the 1970s as part of the pop duo England, Dan and John Ford Coley. Their soft rock hits dominated radios, but Dan eventually felt the pull of a different kind of stage. Country music wasn't louder, but it was truer, and truth was always where his voice sounded best. By the 1980s, Dan had fully crossed into country, stacking hits, like a man finally speaking the language his heart preferred. Bop, Everything That Glitters Is Not Gold and You Still Move Me made fans fall for his smooth vocals and earnest delivery. Offstage, Dan wasn't a headline hunter. He was thoughtful, spiritual, family-anchored, and famously private. He didn't need chaos to command respect. His voice did that job for him. Then came the diagnosis that blindsided his inner circle before the public ever caught a whisper. In 2008, Dan was diagnosed with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, a cancer of the lymphatic system. He began treatment immediately, chemotherapy, a stem cell transplant, and an unshakable belief that he might still outrun the odds. For a while, hope flickered. Then the illness returned more aggressive, rewriting the ending without permission. Dan passed away on March 25, 2009, at 61. His funeral was private, his goodbye quiet. But the impact was thunderous in retrospect. Fans grieved a man whose voice had always soothed them, never imagining the same voice would someday need soothing itself. Dan Seals proved something timeless. The softest voices sometimes fight the hardest wars and leave the deepest echoes. Number 14. Charlie Rich, the silver-tongued pianist whose final curtain fell in a motel. Charlie Rich was never just country. He was country, jazz, blues, and gospel stirred into one smoky late-night cocktail that somehow tasted like home. Born in 1932 in Colt, Arkansas, Charlie grew up around church choirs and piano keys, learning early that genre labels were suggestions, not rules. He first made waves in Memphis as a session pianist and songwriter, penning music for others while quietly shaping a sound of his own. When he broke out in the 1970s, hits like Behind Closed Doors, The Most Beautiful Girl, and Rollin' with the Flow proved his theory right. You could whisper soul into country, and the world would lean in to listen. And lean in they did. His voice was smooth, intimate, electric, without ever raising its pulse too high. But the most poetic twist of Charlie's life wasn't musical. It was mortal. In July 1995, while on a road trip to Florida, Charlie fell ill and was hospitalized briefly in Louisiana. He later checked into a motel for the night, exhausted, hopeful, and unaware the final verse had already been written. On July 25, 1995, Charlie passed away in his sleep at 62 from a pulmonary embolism, a blood clot that stole his breath quietly, the same way his songs once stole hearts loudly. No stage, no cameras, no encore. Just a motel room, a journey paused mid-mileage, and a legend sealed in silence. Charlie Rich didn't just blend genres. He blurred the line between music and memory, reminding us that sometimes the softest endings belong to the loudest legacies. Number 15. Jim Ed Brown, the voice of harmony, humility, and a world that kept ringing after he was gone. Jim Ed Brown felt like family long before he became one. Born in 1934 in Sparkman, Arkansas, Jim Ed first rose to fame in the 1950s, alongside his sisters Maxine and Bonnie, as part of the trio, the Browns. Their crossover smash, The Three Bells, didn't just chart, it chimed through the cultural soundscape like a church bell you heard even when you weren't trying to listen. But Jim Ed wasn't destined to stay in the background of a family act. He stepped into a solo career with warmth, professionalism, and a quiet charisma that made him easy to root for and impossible to resent. Later, his duets with Helen Cornelius, especially the hit I Don't Want to Have to Marry You, added another layer to his legacy, country romance sung with sincerity, not spectacle. He also became a respected radio host, a man fans invited into their cars, kitchens, and emotional safe zones without hesitation. Then came the diagnosis that dimmed his touring boots, but never his spirit, lung cancer, in 2014. For a while, doctors said the word, everyone clung to remission. But remission was a comma, not a conclusion. The cancer returned later in 2015, tightening its grip on his strength. By June 11, 2015, Jim Ed passed away at 81 in Franklin, Tennessee, surrounded by family, peace intact, dignity unshaken. Jim Ed Brown never needed tabloid noise to prove his impact. His legacy told in kindness, echoed in respect, and still rings today in the hearts of listeners who prefer their legends honest, steady, and human. He taught us something simple: harmony isn't just musical. Sometimes it's the way a man leaves the world quietly but stays in it forever through sound, story, and soul. Hollywood promised fame and forever. But for these stars, the final scene wasn't applause, it was fire. Burning cars, exploding planes, Homes turned into coffins. Behind the red carpets and perfect smiles, real tragedies unfolded, fast, violent, and unforgiving. Some were at the height of fame. None of them knew their final minutes had already begun. Tonight, we reveal Hollywood stars whose lives ended in flames. Stay until the end. One story still haunts Hollywood today. Number 1. Martha Mansfield, the fire Hollywood never forgot. Hollywood sold the silent era as elegant, graceful, and untouchable. But for Martha Mansfield, fame didn't fade quietly, it ignited. It was November 30th, 1923, a warm afternoon on a dusty Texas film set. Cameras were resting. Actors laughed between takes. Martha, only 24 years old and already considered one of Hollywood's brightest rising stars, stepped into a car to wait out a short break. She was wearing a heavy Civil War-era costume, layers of fabric, beautiful on screen, deadly in real life. Then, in a single careless moment, a lit match passed too close. The dress caught fire instantly. Flames raced up her body faster than anyone could react. Crew members screamed. Co-stars rushed forward, beating at the fire with bare hands and coats. One actor wrapped her in his overcoat, burning himself in the process. The set moments earlier, filled with laughter, turned into chaos, smoke, and horror. Martha was rushed to the hospital, still conscious, still in agony. Doctors fought through the night, but by the next day, the burns were too severe. Hollywood had lost her. What makes her death unbearable is the timing. Martha Mansfield wasn't fading. She wasn't forgotten. She was just beginning. Studios saw her as the next great star of the silent screen. And yet her final scene wasn't captured on film, it played out in fire in front of witnesses who would never forget it. Her death shocked the industry and exposed a terrifying truth behind Hollywood's dreams: safety barely existed. Nearly a century later, her name still lingers as a warning that sometimes the brightest stars burn out in seconds before the world ever gets to know them. Number 2, Paul Walker, the fast life that ended in fire. Hollywood knew Paul Walker as the calm hero behind the wheel. Fast cars, big stunts, perfect control. But his final ride had no cameras, no second takes, and no escape. It was November 30th, 2013. A quiet Saturday afternoon in Santa Clarita, California. Paul had just left a charity event for victims of Typhoon Haiyan, smiling relaxed, doing what he loved most outside of acting. He was riding in the passenger seat of a red Porsche Carrera GT, driven by his close friend, Roger Rodas. Minutes later, everything went wrong. The car lost control at extreme speed. It slammed into a concrete light pole, struck a tree, and exploded into flames so intense they could be seen from blocks away. Witnesses ran toward the wreckage, shouting Paul's name, but the heat forced them back. The fire was unstoppable. By the time firefighters arrived, the car was already melting into the pavement. The coroner later confirmed that Paul suffered fatal trauma from the impact, but it was the fire that turned the crash into something far more horrifying. Severe burns and thermal injuries sealed his fate within seconds. A man who had survived countless high-speed chases on screen lost his life on a quiet suburban street. The irony devastated fans around the world. Paul Walker was not just an action star. He was a father, a philanthropist, a man who used his fame to help disaster victims through his organization Reach Out worldwide. He was planning another charity mission just days later. As news spread, fans gathered at the crash site, lighting candles and leaving flowers. The tree was eventually removed, but the scar never faded. Years later, people still visit the spot, standing in silence, where fire erased a life that felt unfinished. Paul Walker lived fast on screen. But in real life, his final moments were stolen by flames that no one could outrun. Number 3. Dennis Patrick, the quiet actor who never made it out. Dennis Patrick was never the loudest name in Hollywood. No tabloid scandals, no red carpet chaos. Just decades of steady work and a quiet life high above the city. That silence ended after midnight on October 13, 2002. Neighbors in the Hollywood Hills noticed thick black smoke pouring out of a 2-story home tucked into the hillside. Flames were already climbing through the roof when firefighters arrived. The house was old, built mostly of wood, and the fire spread fast, too fast. Inside, Dennis Patrick never made it to the door. Fire crews found him near the staircase unconscious, overcome by smoke before he could escape. The heat caused the roof to collapse moments later. By morning, the home was gone. Only a stone fireplace remained standing in the ashes. Investigators later determined the fire likely started from an electrical malfunction in a floor lamp. A small failure, a deadly outcome. Dennis Patrick was 84 years old. To audiences, his face was familiar even if his name was not. He appeared in hundreds of television episodes across decades, including Dark Shadows Dallas, The $6 Million Man, and countless other series. He was one of those actors Hollywood depended on quietly. Reliable, professional, always there when the story needed him. Off-screen, he lived simply. He avoided parties. He loved the calm of his hillside home. That same quiet life became the setting of his final moments. What makes his death haunting is how ordinary it was. No explosion, no headlines, just smoke filling a room while the city slept below. Dennis Patrick helped build American television without ever demanding the spotlight. And in the end, he disappeared the same way he lived. Quietly, surrounded by smoke, leaving behind a career most people never realized they loved. Number 4. Aaliyah, the future that vanished in seconds. Aaliyah was not slowing down. She was accelerating. On August 25, 2001, the 22-year-old singer and actress had just finished filming a music video in the Bahamas. The shoot was hot, exhausting, and successful. Everyone wanted to leave quickly. The flight back to Florida was supposed to take only minutes. It never made it out of the sky. Seconds after takeoff, the small twin-engine plane struggled to gain altitude. Witnesses saw it wobble tilt sharply, then plunge nose first into a nearby marsh. The impact triggered an explosion. Flames swallowed the aircraft almost instantly, sending thick black smoke into the air before anyone could reach it. All 9 people on board were killed. Investigators later revealed what the passengers never knew. The plane was overloaded by hundreds of pounds. The pilot was not properly licensed to fly that aircraft. The extra weight and imbalance turned a routine departure into a fatal countdown that ended almost as soon as it began. Aaliyah died instantly from severe trauma and burns. There was no warning, no time to react, just a future erased in seconds. What made her death devastating was the timing. Aaliyah was entering a new phase of superstardom. Her music dominated the charts. Her film career was taking off with leading roles and major studio plans ahead. Many believed she would define the next generation of pop culture. Instead, the world watched as her potential was frozen forever at 22. Vigils erupted across New York, Los Angeles, and Detroit. Her funeral was broadcast worldwide, a white casket carried beneath doves and silence. Fans struggled to understand how someone so full of life could disappear so suddenly. Aaliyah's final moments were consumed by fire. But her voice, her image, and her influence refused to fade. Some stars burn out slowly. Others are taken at their brightest point. And Hollywood is still haunted by the one it never got to see grow old. Number 5. Audie Murphy, the war hero who never escaped fire. Audie Murphy had already survived what most men never could. Gunfire, explosions, entire battlefields turned into ruins. War failed to take him. Peace did not. On May 28, 1971, a small twin-engine plane lifted into thick fog over the Appalachian Mountains. Audie Murphy was on board traveling from Atlanta to Martinsville. The weather was bad. Visibility was worse. Then, without warning, the aircraft vanished from radar. Hours later, search teams found the wreckage scattered across the slopes of Brush Mountain in Virginia. The plane had slammed into the hillside and erupted into flames. Fire burned through the debris for hours, leaving behind smoke, twisted metal, and silence. All 6 people on board were killed instantly. The impact alone was fatal, but the fire ensured there was nothing left to save. The remains were so badly burned that identification had to be made through dental records. Investigators later concluded that poor weather and pilot error led the aircraft off course. But once it hit the mountain, the flames decided everything else. Audie Murphy was only 45 years old. What makes his death so haunting is who he was. Before Hollywood, Audie Murphy was the most decorated American soldier of World War II. He earned the Medal of Honor and every major combat award for bravery. He survived ambushes, gunfire, and near-death moments across Europe. After the war, Hollywood turned him into a star. He played cowboys, soldiers, and heroes, including himself in the film To Hell and Back. Audiences saw strength, calm, control. But in the end, none of that mattered. The man who survived the deadliest war in human history lost his life in a foggy mountain crash far from any battlefield. Thousands attended his funeral at Arlington National Cemetery, where he was buried with full military honors. Audie Murphy faced death and walked away more times than history can count. But fire waiting in the quiet of peace finally claimed him. Number 6, Linda Darnell, the perfect face swallowed by fire. Hollywood once called Linda Darnell the girl with the perfect face. Studio lights adored her. Cameras followed her every move. But perfection offered no protection when the fire came. On April 10, 1965, Linda was spending the night at a friend's modest home in Glenview, Illinois. It was quiet. Ordinary. Nothing about the evening felt dangerous. In the early hours of the morning, a fire started in the living room, later believed to have been caused by a cigarette left smoldering on a couch. Within minutes, smoke filled the house. Linda was asleep upstairs when the heat reached her room. She woke disoriented, trapped by thick smoke and spreading flames. Neighbors rushed in, smashing windows and pulling her friend and a young child to safety. Linda did not make it out in time. Firefighters found her near the kitchen door unconscious, her body badly burned. She was rushed to the hospital with third-degree burns covering most of her body. Doctors fought to save her, but the damage was too severe. Linda Darnell died the following day. She was 41 years old. What makes her death especially cruel is where she was in life. Linda was not a forgotten star. She was trying to turn. After years of personal struggles, failed marriages, and battles with alcohol, she had begun to talk openly about a comeback. That very night, friends said she was in good spirits watching her old films on television and speaking about future opportunities. Instead, fire ended the conversation forever. Linda Darnell rose to fame in the 1940s as one of 20th Century Fox's brightest stars, appearing in films like Forever Amber and A Letter to Three Wives. Audiences saw elegance and confidence. Few saw the loneliness behind it. When the investigation ended, the fire was ruled accidental. No scandal, no mystery, just a quiet house and a single mistake that erased one of Hollywood's most beautiful faces. Linda Darnell spent her life glowing under studio lights. In the end, it was a different kind of flame that took her away. Number 8. Jack Cassidy, the star who never woke up. Jack Cassidy knew how to light up a room. On stage, on television, in real life. But the same flame that followed him for decades became the one he never escaped. Just before dawn on December 12, 1976, firefighters were called to an apartment building on North Kings Road in West Hollywood. Smoke poured from one unit as flames climbed through the windows. Neighbors said they smelled burning fabric long before the alarm sounded. The apartment belonged to Jack Cassidy. By the time firefighters forced their way inside, the heat was overwhelming. Parts of the ceiling collapsed as the fire spread through the small space. When the flames were finally brought under control, they found Jack lying near the front door. He never made it out. The coroner later confirmed that he died from smoke inhalation while asleep. The fire likely started when a cigarette ignited the couch, a tragic possibility for a man known to smoke after long nights of drinking. The blaze destroyed nearly everything inside, leaving behind blackened walls and silence where laughter once lived. Jack Cassidy was 49 years old. To audiences, he was charm personified, a Tony Award-winning Broadway star, a familiar face on television shows like He and She and Columbo. He played confident, clever men with ease, often stealing scenes with a single look or line. Behind the curtain, his life was far more complicated. Jack struggled with bipolar disorder and alcoholism battles that strained his relationships and followed him quietly through his success. His son, singer David Cassidy, was among the first notified. He later described the loss as sudden, surreal, and impossible to process. Number 9. Butterfly McQueen, the quiet life ended in flames. Butterfly McQueen was already a legend long before the fire. Her voice, her expressions, one role that cinema would never forget. Yet her final years were lived far from Hollywood and far from the spotlight. On December 22, 1995, a fire broke out inside a small home in Augusta, Georgia. Neighbors noticed smoke rising just after sunset and called for help. By the time firefighters arrived, flames were tearing through the house, bursting through the roof, and filling the street with thick, black smoke. Inside, they found Butterfly McQueen near the doorway, still alive but gravely injured. A kerosene heater had malfunctioned and exploded as she tried to light it. The flash fire spread instantly, trapping her before she could escape. She suffered severe burns over most of her body and was rushed to the hospital. She died the following day. She was 84 years old. To film history. Butterfly McQueen was immortalized as Prissy in Gone with the Wind, a performance remembered by generations. But behind that fame was a woman who refused to be boxed in by stereotypes. Frustrated by the limited roles offered to black actresses of her era, she chose dignity over stardom and walked away from Hollywood. What makes her death especially tragic is its symbolism. A woman who spent her life resisting forces that tried to confine her was finally trapped by a fire she never expected. Not on a stage, not under bright lights, but alone in a modest home fighting flames instead of applause. After her passing, tributes poured in from film historians and fans who finally recognized her courage, not just as an actress, but as a woman who chose her own path long before it was safe to do so. Number 10. Teresa Graves, the star who chose peace but found smoke. Teresa Graves walked away from Hollywood at the height of her power. Fame did not abandon her. She abandoned fame. Just before midnight on October 10, 2002, firefighters rushed to a small, single-story home on West 51st Street in Los Angeles. Neighbors had seen smoke pouring into the night sky. By the time crews arrived, flames were already tearing through the roof. Inside the house was Teresa Graves. Firefighters found her unconscious near her bed, surrounded by thick smoke. The heat was intense, but the flames had not fully reached her yet. Paramedics tried to revive her, but it was too late. The coroner later confirmed that she died from smoke inhalation before the fire overtook the room. She was 54 years old. Investigators determined the fire began when a faulty space heater ignited nearby bedding and curtains. A small household object turned deadly while the city slept. To television history, Teresa Graves was a trailblazer. She rose to fame on Rowan and Martin's Laugh In before making history in 1974 as the first black woman to lead her own hour-long television drama, Get Christie Love. Her character was fearless, stylish, and in control. Her catchphrase became iconic. Audiences saw strength and confidence every time she appeared on screen. But after success came a different calling. Teresa stepped away from Hollywood and devoted her life to faith, charity, and caring for others. She lived quietly, mentored young women, and found peace far from cameras and applause. Friends later said she was content with her choices and at ease with the life she built. That is what makes her death so unsettling. There was no scandal, no chaos, just smoke filling a room where a woman had chosen solitude over spotlight. The fire destroyed the house completely. What remained were memories and the echo of a star who changed television history and then disappeared by choice. Teresa Graves once lit up the screen with confidence and grace. In the end, it was silent smoke that carried her away. Number 11. Dennis Patrick, the familiar face lost in the smoke. Dennis Patrick was one of those actors everyone recognized. Few knew his name. Hollywood depended on him quietly. Just after midnight on October 13, 2002, neighbors in the Hollywood Hills noticed thick smoke rolling out of a hillside home. Within minutes, flames tore through the wooden structure, climbing fast and trapping everything inside. Firefighters arrived quickly, but the house was already burning out of control. Inside, Dennis Patrick never reached the exit. He was found near the staircase unconscious, overcome by smoke before he could escape. The roof collapsed shortly after. By sunrise, the home was reduced to rubble. Only a stone fireplace remained standing. Investigators later concluded the fire likely started from an electrical malfunction in a floor lamp. Something small, something ordinary, something deadly. Dennis Patrick was 84 years old. His career stretched across decades of American television. He appeared in series like Dark Shadows, Dallas, The $6 Million Man, and countless other shows during the golden age of broadcasting. He played authority figures, mysterious strangers, and steady professionals. He was the kind of actor who held stories together without ever demanding attention. Off-screen, he lived the same way he worked. Quiet, private, far from Hollywood parties. He preferred the calm of his hillside home to the noise of fame. That is what makes his death so haunting. There was no spectacle, no headlines filled with scandal, just smoke filling a familiar room while the city slept below. Dennis Patrick helped shape television history one role at a time, and in the end, he disappeared as quietly as he lived. Not under bright lights, but in the silence left behind after the fire. Number 12, Royce D. Applegate, the steady actor trapped by the flames. Royce D. Applegate never chased fame. He earned respect instead. Just after sunrise on January 1, 2003, the first morning of a new year turned deadly in the Hollywood Hills. Neighbors on Green Valley Road woke to the smell of smoke and the sound of crackling fire. Flames were already racing through a two-story home perched along the narrow hillside. That home belonged to Royce D. Applegate. Firefighters arrived to find the upper level fully engulfed. The heat was intense, and the old wooden structure allowed the fire to spread with terrifying speed. Neighbors shouted his name from the street, but there was no way inside. The flames controlled everything. When the fire was finally contained, Royce was found near an upstairs window. He never made it out. The coroner later confirmed he died from smoke inhalation and burns. Investigators believed the fire was accidental, possibly caused by faulty electrical wiring hidden in the ceiling, a silent problem that gave no warning. Royce D. Applegate was 44 years old. To audiences, he was a familiar and trusted presence. He appeared in films like Oh Brother, Where Art Thou and The Rookie, and became widely known as Chief Crocker on the television series Sequest DSV. His rugged voice and grounded performances made even small roles feel real. Before acting, he had served in the United States Navy, a background that shaped both his discipline and the roles he chose. Off-screen, he lived simply. He enjoyed woodworking kept to himself and was known in the neighborhood for caring for stray animals. Friends described him as kind, steady, and far removed from Hollywood ego. Royce D. Applegate built a career on reliability and heart. In the end, fire took him without warning, leaving Hollywood to mourn a man who mattered more than fame ever could. Number 13. Mike Todd, the dreamer who fell from the sky. Mike Todd believed bigger was always better. Bigger ideas, bigger risks, bigger dreams. That belief carried him to the top of Hollywood, and then straight into the fire. In the early hours of March 22, 1958, a twin-engine plane cut through a violent snowstorm over New Mexico. Mike Todd was on board flying from California to New York for a promotional event. The weather was brutal. Ice clung to the wings. Turbulence rocked this aircraft as radio contact faded. Then the sky went silent. Moments later, the plane slammed into a remote desert canyon and exploded on impact. The crash ignited a massive fire that burned through the darkness, lighting up the landscape long before rescuers could reach the site. By the time the wreckage was discovered, there were no survivors. The flames had erased nearly everything. Mike Todd was 48 years old. Though sometimes remembered as a flamboyant personality, Todd was one of Hollywood's great innovators. He produced Around the World in 80 Days, a film that won the Academy Award for Best Picture and redefined spectacle in cinema. He believed movies should feel like events, something audiences could not ignore. Off-screen, his life was just as dramatic. He was married to Elizabeth Taylor, one of the most famous women in the world. She had planned to join him on the flight, but stayed behind due to illness. That decision haunted her for the rest of her life. What makes Mike Todd's death so chilling is how sudden it was. One moment he was planning his next triumph. The next, his story ended in a frozen sky far from any red carpet. Hollywood responded in shock. Hundreds attended his memorial. Colleagues spoke of a man who pushed boundaries and refused to think small. Yet all that ambition meant nothing against ice altitude and fire. Mike Todd spent his life chasing the impossible and often achieving it. But in the end, the sky offered no second chances, only silent smoke and a dream that fell burning back to earth. Off-screen, his life was just as dramatic. He was married to Elizabeth Taylor, one of the most famous women in the world. She had planned to join him on the flight, but stayed behind due to illness. That decision haunted her for the rest of her life. What makes Mike Todd's death so chilling is how sudden it was. One moment he was planning his next triumph. The next, his story ended in a frozen sky far from any red carpet. Hollywood responded in shock. Hundreds attended his memorial. Colleagues spoke of a man who pushed boundaries and refused to think small. Yet all that ambition meant nothing against ice altitude and fire. Mike Todd spent his life chasing the impossible and often achieving it. But in the end, the sky offered no second chances, only silent smoke and a dream that fell burning back to earth. Fame shines bright, but it doesn't protect you. Behind the cameras and red carpets, 5 stars met endings so shocking, so heartbreaking, they left the world breathless. From a designer's quiet fall on Christmas Eve, to a pop idol's spiral in a Buenos Aires hotel, to a filmmaker's final silence, a guitarist's tragic crash, and a doctor lost just steps from safety. These are not just deaths. They're warnings, mysteries, and reminders that even in the spotlight, darkness can still find you. Number 1. Carl Cochran, the guitarist who refused to stop playing. February 19, 2025. Bridgewater, New Jersey. The morning was quiet until a single crash shattered it. In the passenger seat of a 2015 Subaru sat Carl Cochran, a 61-year-old guitarist whose riffs once roared beside legends like Kiss and Joe Lynn Turner. At the wheel was his 90-year-old mother, Ara. They were just backing out across their front yard when the car lost control and slammed into a tree. In an instant, Carl, the man who had cheated death once before, was gone. For the rock world, it felt unreal. Carl wasn't just a guitarist. He was a survivor. In 2014, he suffered a massive stroke that left him in a coma and stole his ability to move and speak. Most would have given up. Carl didn't. He learned to play again, one hand partly paralyzed, but his spirit untouched. Fans still remember seeing him on stage at the Kiss crew's frail body, fierce heart, smiling like the music itself kept him alive. His story was one of quiet resilience. From his early days jamming in LA to co-writing Into the Void on Kiss's 1998 reunion album Psycho Circus, Carl earned respect from rock's biggest names. He toured with Ace Frehley, jammed with the Eric Singer Project, and even led his own band, Voodoo Land. When the stroke hit, he turned to teaching and producing, mentoring young players like Billy Wilkins, who said, "Even with one hand, he played better than anyone I knew." After the crash, tributes poured in. Paul Stanley called him a gentle giant. Bruce Kulick called the loss gut-wrenching. Joe Lynn Turner wept, saying Carl was more than a bandmate, he was a brother. His fiancée Garasano simply wrote "My Forever." Carl Cochran spent a lifetime chasing sound-fighting pain and giving everything to music. Even after losing nearly everything, he kept playing. And when the silence finally came, it wasn't defeat, it was the final note of a song that never stopped singing. Number 2. Dr. Michael Mosley, the doctor who couldn't save himself. June 5, 2024. On the sun-drenched Greek island of Symi, Dr. Michael Mosley, Britain's beloved TV doctor, science storyteller, and health pioneer, set out for a simple walk that would become his final journey. He'd spent the morning with his wife, Claire Bailey, and friends at Agios Nikolaos Beach. When he decided to walk back alone, no one worried. It was just a mile and a half, and Michael loved challenges. He carried a bottle of water, a backpack, an umbrella, and a hat. But he left his phone behind, afraid it might get wet. Security cameras later captured him walking through the village of Pedi, cheerful, steady. Minutes later, he vanished. Temperatures that day were brutal, over 104 degrees. Locals said even seasoned hikers avoided the mountain path he chose. Michael pressed on, perhaps confident. perhaps already feeling the heat sink into his body. He stumbled once, leaned against a wall, then disappeared from view. For 5 agonizing days, the island searched. Helicopters circled. Boats scanned the coast. His wife and their 4 children retraced every step, clinging to hope. On June 9th, a glint of metal his watch caught a restaurant worker's eye near a fence behind a beach bar. Just yards from safety, Michael lay face up in the sun, hidden from view. He had collapsed less than 300 feet from people who could have saved him. There were no injuries, no foul play. The cause, heat exhaustion, dehydration, and the cruel irony of timing. A man who taught millions how to live longer had been undone by the elements he studied. Dr. Mosley spent his life helping others fight illness, find balance, and believe in the power of the human body. His wife called him kind, funny, brilliant. Number 3, Lin Ban, the sparkle that faded too soon. It was Christmas Eve 2024 in the snowy paradise of Aspen. Lin Ban, jewelry designer to icons like Rihanna and Beyoncé, and star of Bling Empire New York, was spending the holidays with her family. She'd built a life of glamour, power, and love. That morning, she hit the slopes, something she'd done countless times before. Cautious helmet on, full of life. But fate doesn't care about caution. At the top of the mountain, her ski caught on something. A fall. A hit to the face. It seemed minor. She even stood up, skied down, joked about the headache. But inside her skull, a quiet storm had begun. Doctors later found a brain bleed. Emergency surgery followed a craniotomy. Lin survived barely. Days later, she posted a photo on Instagram, her head half-shaved, a surgical scar running like lightning across her scalp. "In a blink of an eye, life can change," she wrote. Fans, friends, and castmates flooded her comments with love. She thanked them all, strong, smiling, alive. But life had one more cruel twist. Back home in New York, she seemed to be recovering, surrounded by her husband, Jet Kane, and their son, Sebastian. Then, on January 20th, 2025, Jet found her unresponsive in bed. Just like that, gone. 52. Sebastian broke the news online, calling her his best friend, his hero. "I love you more than life itself," he wrote the words she'd always said to him. The world mourned. Rihanna called her their fairy godmother. Friends remembered her laugh, her elegance, her fire. Lin Ban had conquered fashion, walked beside legends, and lived boldly. But in the end, her story wasn't about fame or fortune. It was about fragility. Even the strongest sparkle can fade quietly in the dark. Number 4. Liam Payne, The Fall of a Broken Star. October 16th, 2024. Buenos Aires shimmered with summer heat as Liam Payne, the 31-year-old former One Direction heartthrob, checked into the Casa Sur Palermo Hotel. To the world, he was a pop icon. To those close to him, he was a man fighting demons no spotlight could drown out. The trip was meant to be short, a quiet escape with his friend and part-time manager, Roelio Roger Norris. But by nightfall, it turned into one of the most haunting stories in modern celebrity history. That morning, Liam met 2 women, Aldana Serrano and Lucila Goya, after contacting them through an escort site. They described him as restless, jittery, surrounded by chaos, whiskey in one hand, a crystal-like substance in the other. He begged them to help him find more drugs. When they refused, the mood snapped. He smashed a watch, broke. A TV shouted at nothing. The room smelled of smoke and metal. Hours later, remorse hit. He fell to his knees, apologizing, trembling. By afternoon, hotel guests saw him in the lobby, agitated, throwing money, muttering about $20,000 just because I can. Staff called for help, but it was too late. Security footage showed him stumbling toward his balcony. Minutes later, a crash echoed through the courtyard. Liam had fallen 3 stories. Toxicology reports revealed the truth. Alcohol, antidepressants, and synthetic drugs, a cocktail that blurred the line between pain and madness. Police ruled it an accident, but nothing about it felt accidental. 2 hotel employees, Brian Pays and Ezequiel Pereira, were later charged for supplying drugs. Others cleared of blame. For fans, it was unthinkable. The boy who once sang about light had fallen into the dark. Liam Payne's death wasn't just tragic, it was a warning about fame's cruel silence and how even the loudest applause can't drown out a cry for help. Number 5. Jeff Baena, the filmmaker who faded in silence. January 3, 2025. Los Angeles woke to a gray morning, unaware that one of Hollywood's quiet visionaries had slipped away. Jeff Baena, writer, director, and husband of actress Aubrey Plaza, had spent his life turning pain into art. But in his final months, the pain turned inward. After more than a decade together, he and Plaza had quietly separated in September 2024. She moved to New York. He stayed behind in LA, surrounded by memories that had stopped feeling like home. Friends said he was still working, still funny, still kind, but something had dimmed. He'd begun therapy after Plaza, worried by a strange late-night conversation, asked a friend to check on him. There were no drugs, no scandals, no warning signs, only sleepless nights and quiet exhaustion. The night before his death, he and Plaza spoke on the phone, a normal conversation, full of care but heavy with unspoken ache. At 7:36 a.m., he texted her one last time. Hours later, his dog walker arrived to find loud music echoing through the house. Jeff didn't answer. She went inside and found him gone. Peaceful. Alone. 47. Police found no struggle, no note, just his phone placed carefully on a stair step, like a silent goodbye. The medical examiner ruled it self-inflicted. Plaza cooperated fully, heartbroken. 2 days later, she skipped the Golden Globes. Jeff Baena had built a career on intimate human stories and Life After Beth Joshi. The Little Hours, Horse Girl, Spin Me Round. His work celebrated the strange beauty of being alive. In the end, the man who helped others see meaning in chaos couldn't escape his own. His friends remembered him as gentle, brilliant, and endlessly giving. The industry lost an artist. Aubrey lost the love she still called home. Number 6. Paul Danon, the star who couldn't outrun his demons. He was supposed to be one of Britain's brightest TV faces, charming, chaotic, unforgettable. Paul Danon shot to fame on Hollyoaks and later became a tabloid favorite for his wild antics and fiery personality. But fame was never enough to silence what haunted him. Behind the swagger was a man drowning in addiction, rehab stints, and heartbreak. He once admitted to spending nearly £1 million trying to get clean and losing himself in the process. On January 15, 2025, police were called to his home in Brislington, Bristol. Inside, they found Paul lifeless. The coroner's report would later reveal a devastating cocktail: heroin, methadone, pregabalin, cocaine, and sleeping pills. He was just 46. Friends said Paul had been really trying to turn things around. He'd been open about his struggles, using podcasts and interviews to help others fight their own battles. But the same demons he warned about finally took him. In his final days, he was said to be reflective, even hopeful. He wanted to act again, to rebuild. Instead, his story ended in quiet tragedy, a reminder of how fragile redemption can be. Paul Danon wasn't just a headline. He was a human being who fought for light in a world that kept pulling him back into the dark. And though his demons won in the end, the courage of his fight still speaks louder than his fall. Number 7. Margarita Forés, the chef who fed the soul of a nation. Margarita Forés wasn't just a chef, she was the heartbeat of Filipino cuisine. Warm, fierce, endlessly passionate, she turned local flavors into global art. Named Asia's best female chef in 2016, she built an empire of taste. Cebu Luso Grace Park, each restaurant a love letter to home. After surviving thyroid cancer, Margarita lived like every meal could be her last, full of joy, fire, and gratitude. But on February 11, 2025, tragedy struck. During a stopover in Hong Kong, after a trip to Morocco and Madrid, she was found unresponsive in her hotel room at the Upper House. The cause was cardiac arrest. She was 65. Her passing sent shockwaves through the culinary world. Tributes poured in from chefs she'd mentored to diners she'd inspired. They spoke of her laughter, her artistry, and how she made food feel like hope. Forays believed that food could heal, connect, and celebrate identity. And in her kitchen, that was always true. She left behind not just recipes, but a legacy proof that even a single plate made with love can change the way a nation tastes its own story. Number 8. Gianni Russo, The Beating That Wasn't Acting. The Godfather, 1972, drips with power, betrayal, and blood. But one of its most brutal scenes wasn't just movie magic, it was personal. Gianni Russo, playing Carlo Rizzi, was set to be beaten senseless by Sonny Corleone, played by James Caan. On paper, it was a choreographed fight. On set, it turned savage. Caan didn't pull punches. He threw Russo into a fence, smashed a garbage can over him, and kept going. 2 ribs cracked, an elbow fractured. The pain was real. Rumor had it Caan held a grudge. Maybe Russo crossed a line off camera. Maybe Sonny just saw red. No one said it aloud, but everyone felt the tension. When the cameras stopped, Russo wasn't acting. He was bleeding. That scene became iconic, a raw, unforgettable eruption of violence. But behind it was something more dangerous than method acting, real animosity unleashed in front of millions. In the mafia of Hollywood, some beatings leave scars far beyond the screen. Gianni Russo lived it. The bruises weren't makeup. The betrayal, very real. Number 9. Jackie Chan, The Stunt That Left a Hole in His Head. By 1986, Jackie Chan was already a legend, martial arts maestro, human daredevil, unstoppable force of will. But even legends bleed. On the set of Armor of God, the stunt looked simple by Jackie's standards: jump from a wall onto a tree branch. No wires, no stuntman, just Jackie, gravity, and faith. He leapt. The branch snapped. He plummeted 15 feet headfirst onto a rock. Silence. Crew screamed. Blood pooled. Jackie was rushed into surgery. A piece of his skull had shattered, a bone fragment pierced his brain. Doctors saved him barely. He woke with a hole in his skull, now sealed with a plastic plug. Partial hearing gone forever. Anyone else would have quit. Jackie didn't pause. He returned. Trained harder. Filmed more. Laughed through the pain. Hid the scars. He didn't just survive, he transformed trauma into legacy. This wasn't just a stunt gone wrong. It was the moment cinema nearly lost its most fearless hero, and the moment Jackie Chan proved that true strength isn't in the fall, but in getting back up. Number 10. Brandon Lee, The Bullet That Shouldn't Have Been. March 31st, 1993. The Crow was supposed to launch Brandon Lee into stardom. Son of martial arts legend Bruce Lee, he was finally stepping out of his father's shadow, dark, brooding, magnetic on screen. The role was his breakout. Instead, it became his obituary. The scene called for his character to be shot. The gun was supposed to fire blanks, but a fragment of a real bullet left lodged in the barrel from a previous mishandled dummy round turned the prop into a real weapon. When the trigger was pulled, the bullet hit Brandon in the abdomen. He collapsed. At first, the crew thought he was acting. He wasn't. Rushed into emergency surgery, Brandon died hours later. He was just 28. Hollywood was stunned. Fans were shattered. And a promising life was cut short, not by a stunt gone wrong, but by an avoidable mistake, a brutal failure in safety. Brandon Lee didn't die for a role. He died because someone didn't check the gun twice. And in that moment, fiction and fate collided, leaving behind a haunting truth. Sometimes the scariest thing on set is the illusion of safety. Number 11. Kevin Costner tied to the storm. Waterworld 1995 was chaos from the start. Over-budget, overcomplicated, and filmed in the most unforgiving setting, the open ocean. But for Kevin Costner, the production nearly turned fatal. In one scene, Costner's character is tied to the mast of a trimaran during a brewing storm. The wind was meant to howl. The waves were meant to rage. But nature doesn't take direction. A real squall rolled in, and Kevin still tied to the mast. Waves slammed into the boat, tossing it like a toy. The mast whipped violently as Costner's body snapped back and forth, completely helpless. The crew watched in horror, unable to reach him. There were no stunt doubles, no CGI, just a man bound and battered by the Pacific. Finally, rescuers got to him seconds before it could have turned deadly. He survived. Shaken, bruised, silent. That scene made the final cut. But behind the shot was a terrifying truth. Costner didn't just act through a storm, he endured one. Not on script, not planned. Just raw, unpredictable nature, reminding Hollywood who's really in control. Number 12, George Clooney, the pain that nearly took him. In Syriana 2005, George Clooney wasn't just playing a man broken by the system, he was becoming one. For a brutal torture scene, Clooney was strapped to a chair bound tightly. But something went horribly wrong. The chair tipped. He crashed to the concrete floor head first. The impact tore his spinal membrane, causing spinal fluid to leak into his body. Clooney didn't just feel pain, he lived in it. Blinding headaches, nausea, a pressure in his skull so intense he later said it made him consider ending his life. For weeks he was bedridden. For months he couldn't work. The smile, the charm gone. And no one saw it coming. Clooney eventually underwent spinal surgery and made a full recovery, but not without scars. Emotional, physical, invisible to the camera. The performance won him an Oscar. But behind the applause was a brutal truth. This role nearly killed him. In an industry that praises commitment, George Clooney paid a price few ever see, because sometimes the most dangerous stunts are the ones no one plans. Number 13. Steve Irwin, the stingray that stopped the world. Steve Irwin was fearless. The crocodile hunter with his khaki shirt and trademark crikey made the wild feel wondrous. He wrestled crocs, stared down venomous snakes, and brought the untamed world into living rooms with passion and awe. But on September 4, 2006, while filming Ocean's Deadliest at the Great Barrier Reef, nature struck back. Between takes, Irwin swam alongside a stingray. It was meant to be peaceful, safe. But in a sudden flash, the creature struck its barb, piercing his chest and puncturing his heart. Irwin pulled the barb out himself, but the damage was done. He died within minutes. His cameraman was there, helpless. The world didn't just mourn a TV star. It lost a voice for the voiceless, a conservationist, a father, a man who loved the wild more than himself. Steve Irwin died doing what he loved, but even that truth didn't soften the blow. Because when someone so alive is gone in an instant, the silence is deafening. The ocean gave him everything, and in the end, it took him too. Number 14. Rodney Mitchell, the crew member, who disappeared off the frame. On June 18, 1980 or so, the headlines wrote, Rodney Mitchell, a young assistant cameraman, died in a tragic incident during preparations for a high-speed The Dukes of Hazzard chase scene in Lake Sherwood, California. Crew and stuntmen were testing angles and movements inside a rigged GMC camera truck. The road, slick from rain, betrayed them. The truck lost control, flipped violently, and Rodney Mitchell was killed on impact while 8 others were injured. There were no actors in sight. No dramatic stunts. Just everyday heroes working behind the scenes, crafting magic. Suddenly, the magic turned deadly. One moment, Rodney was helping frame the shot. The next, the shot had framed a tragedy. His name vanished from scripts and credits. But his story is a haunting reminder the people behind the lens can become the story too. Rodney Mitchell didn't die performing a stunt, he died shaping one. And that's the real horror, when the frame you're setting up becomes your final scene. Number 15, Dar Robinson, the last jump of a legend. Dar Robinson didn't fear heights. He lived above them. Known for death-defying leaps and setting world records, he wasn't just a stuntman, he was myth in motion. From skyscrapers to canyons, Dar danced with gravity, like it was his stage partner. In 1986, on the set of $1 Million Mystery, he had one more jump to land a motorcycle stunt off a cliff. Easy by his standards. He nailed it. The cameras caught perfection. The stunt ended. But fate didn't. As he rode away from the scene, coasting down a safety road, something went wrong. The brakes failed. The bike veered. Dar Robinson, master of controlled chaos, lost control. He plunged over a second cliff, unplanned, unfilmed, fatal. There were no flames, no explosions, just silence. Dar spent his life falling from the sky and always walked away, until the day he didn't. His final act wasn't in front of the camera, but it was the purest expression of who he was, a man who gave everything for the thrill, the art, and the impossible. The best never fake it, and sometimes they pay the price for being real. Number 16. Roy Kinnear, the fall no one saw coming. He wasn't a hero in armor. He didn't leap from rooftops or stare down explosions. Roy Kinnear was something rarer. He was the beating heart in the background. A smile, a stammer, a softness that made audiences lean in closer. In 1988, while filming The Return of the Musketeers in Toledo, Spain, he was asked to do a simple horseback ride across cobblestones. No risk, no stunt, just another quiet moment in a long, steady career. But the horse slipped. Roy was thrown, his pelvis shattered on impact. He didn't scream. He apologized. Rushed to the hospital, he lingered for a day. Then his heart gave out. Not in battle, not in glory, in stillness. He was 54. Roy didn't die making a spectacle. He died making a scene work. His loss wasn't loud. It was devastating in its quietness. A reminder that sometimes the danger in filmmaking isn't the fire. It's the routine. And in that fall, cinema lost not just an actor, but a rare kind of soul who made stories feel like home. Number 17. Jameson Parker. When Hollywood met a loaded gun. Jameson Parker was no stranger to danger, at least on screen. As one half of the detective duo in the hit 80s series Simon and Simon, he played the cool-headed sleuth who always got out alive. But real life doesn't follow a script. On October 1st, 1992, Parker got into a petty argument with his neighbor in Los Angeles. The spark dog poop left on the wrong lawn. Voices escalated, insults flew, then rage took over. The neighbor pulled a gun. 2 shots rang out. Parker was hit in the armpit and arm. He collapsed bleeding in his driveway. There were no stunt coordinators, no cameras, just pain and chaos. Paramedics saved his life. The shooter was convicted of attempted murder and sentenced to 9 years. But something deeper lingered. Parker survived physically. But emotionally, the trauma left a scar far bigger than any TV cliffhanger. The man who dodged bullets on television now knew exactly how one felt. Number 18. Boris Sagal. The Step That Led to Silence, May 22, 1981. Director Boris Sagal, acclaimed for his work on Masada, The Omega Man, and Rich Man, Poor Man, was in Oregon shooting the NBC miniseries World War III. He was a master of control precision vision. But on that day, one wrong step cost him everything. At the Timberline Lodge near Mount Hood, Sagal exited a helicopter after scouting a location. But instead of walking away from the aircraft, he turned the wrong direction, directly into the spinning tail rotor. The impact was horrifying. He was partially decapitated. Crew members rushed to help. Emergency teams flew him to a Portland hospital, but the injuries were beyond saving. Boris Sagal died 5 hours later. It wasn't a dramatic explosion or on-set stunt. It was a brief lapse, a single misjudged moment amid routine. And it ended the life of one of television's most respected directors. In a business that thrives on illusion, Boris Sagal's death was a brutal dose of reality. When working with machines, even one wrong step can become. Behind Hollywood's glitter lies a graveyard of broken dreams. These stars had fame, beauty, and millions watching them until their lives ended in shocking crashes, brutal murders, and chilling mysteries. Tonight we uncover the dark side of stardom, where the spotlight fades and nightmare begins. Number 1. Jayne Mansfield. Hollywood loved Jayne Mansfield for all the obvious reasons. She was dazzling, fearless, and impossible to ignore, a platinum blonde bombshell with a smile built for flashbulbs and a presence that could turn every head in the room. To the public, she looked like pure glamour. But behind the curves, the headlines, and the camera-ready confidence was a woman fighting to prove she was more than a beautiful image. As her fame exploded, Jayne became one of the few women bold enough to challenge the era's biggest icons. She lit up the screen in films like The Girl Can't Help It, embraced scandal without apology, and built a career on charm, wit, and sheer nerve. She knew Hollywood could worship you one day and replace you the next, so she kept smiling, kept performing, and kept giving the world exactly what it wanted, even when the pressure was crushing. Then, in 1967, everything ended in an instant. While traveling to New Orleans, Jayne's car slammed into a tractor-trailer in a horrific crash that killed her and 2 others. The accident was so violent, it immediately sparked gruesome rumors and national shock. One moment she was a living symbol of fame and seduction. The next, she became another tragic headline in Hollywood's long, dark history. Jayne Mansfield gave the world glamour, excitement, and a larger-than-life fantasy. But behind the spotlight was a woman who wanted to be seen, respected, and remembered for more than her beauty. That may be the saddest part of her story, not just how tragically it ended, but how much of her was never fully understood while she was still alive. Number 2. Will Rogers. Before tragedy froze his name in history, Will Rogers was the voice America trusted. He was witty without being cruel, wise without sounding proud and charming enough to make an entire nation feel like he was speaking straight to them. A cowboy vaudeville star, film actor, and newspaper columnist, Rogers had a rare gift. He could make people laugh while telling them the truth they did not want to hear. By the summer of 1935, Rogers was still chasing stories with the same restless curiosity that made him famous. He joined legendary aviator Wiley Post on a flight through Alaska, a journey tied to Post's exploration of a possible Alaska-Siberia air route. It sounded like the kind of adventure only two American icons could survive: one, a master of the skies; the other, a master of the human spirit. But history can turn brutal in a single heartbeat. On August 15, 1935, near Point Barrow, their aircraft crashed after takeoff, killing both men instantly. The shock hit like a national wound. One moment, Will Rogers was still the warm, familiar face of America's humor and hope. The next, he was gone in the frozen silence of Alaska, leaving behind a country that suddenly felt smaller, sadder, and far less certain of tomorrow. The tragedy of Will Rogers was not just the crash. It was the sudden loss of a man who made an entire nation feel a little more human. He did not belong only to Hollywood or the stage, he belonged to everyday people. And when he was gone, America did not just mourn a legend. It mourned someone who felt like family. Number 3. Phil Hartman. Phil Hartman was the kind of performer who made comedy look effortless. On Saturday Night Live, he could disappear into presidents' egomaniacs or polished fools with chilling precision. On news radio, he turned Bill McNeil into one of television's funniest narcissists. And on The Simpsons, his voices of Troy McClure and Lionel Hutz became the kind of characters audiences never forget. He was not just funny, he was reliable, razor-sharp, and quietly essential to everything he touched. Long before that, Hartman had already built a strange and brilliant career path. He worked with the Groundlings, helped create the world around Pee Wee Herman, co-wrote Pee Wee's Big Adventure, and later appeared in films like House Guest Sergeant Bilko and Jingle All the Way. He had range timing, and that rare gift Hollywood always claims to love: the ability to make everyone around him better. Off-camera, though, the life that seemed stable and successful was hiding cracks no audience could see. Then came the night that turned admiration into heartbreak. In the early hours of May 28, 1998, at the couple's home in Encino, Hartman was shot to death by his wife, Bryn Hartman, after what reports described as a heated argument. She later confessed to a friend, returned to the house, and died by suicide as police closed in. The news was so horrifying because it felt impossible one of the most beloved faces in American comedy had not died in scandal or decline, but in an act of violence inside his own home. That is why Phil Hartman's story still hits so hard. He gave people laughter without forcing it, brilliance without vanity, and characters that slipped so naturally into pop culture they still feel alive. When he died, fans did not just lose the man from SNL News Radio or The Simpsons. They lost one of those rare artists who made the world feel lighter right up until the moment it suddenly went dark. Number 4. Susan Cabot. Susan Cabot had the kind of Hollywood rise that looked glamorous from a distance and far more fragile up close. She built her name in tough, stylish films like Tomahawk, The Duel at Silver Creek, and Ride Clear of Diablo, earning a reputation as a striking presence in the westerns and B-movies that once filled American theaters. Later, she became even more recognizable to cult film fans through Roger Corman's The Wasp Woman. She had beauty screen presence and that sharp, dangerous energy the camera loved. But like so many stars of her era, the spotlight did not protect her from the loneliness waiting outside it. As the years passed, Cabot's life grew quieter and darker. Her acting career faded, and the woman once seen on movie posters slipped further away from the world that had once celebrated her. By the 1980s, reports described her as struggling with severe mental illness, depression, and overwhelming fear. The image of the glamorous actress had long since cracked, leaving behind someone isolated, troubled, and carrying battles the public could not see. It is that hidden collapse that makes her story feel so haunting, because the tragedy did not begin the night she died. In many ways, it had been building for years. Then came the horrifying end. On December 10, 1986, in her Encino home, Susan Cabot was beaten to death with a weightlifting bar by her 22-year-old son, Timothy Roman. The crime stunned Hollywood not only because of its brutality, but because it happened inside the one place that should have been safest, her own home. Roman was later convicted of involuntary manslaughter, and the case drew national attention because it mixed fame, family tragedy, mental illness, and violence into